Hey guys! Tonight we begin with the grim, dangerous, and not so glamorous world of the Roman gladiator. A look beyond the movie heroism into the harsh reality of their short, brutal lives. We're stripping away the romanticized veneer to explore what it truly meant to be a human commodity, destined for the arena's bloody sands. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see our global reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up. Or, more accurately, you've been violently jolted from a shallow, uneasy slumber by the sharp kick of a guard's hobnailed boot to your side, or perhaps the sudden, deafening clang of a heavy iron door slamming open nearby, the sound echoing like doom through the cold, damp, confined space. Forget any lingering notions of a comfortable mattress, your meticulously set alarm clock, or the gentle aroma of freshly brewed coffee. You're sprawled on a hard, unyielding stone slab, or maybe a thin layer of scratchy, flea-infested straw that has seen far too many miserable occupants before you. The air you're attempting to breathe is thick, almost chewable. And when I say thick, I mean it's a palpable, choking miasma that stings your nostrils and coats the back of your throat with a foul taste. It's a complex, unholy cocktail of stale, unwashed sweat from dozens of bodies crammed together in unbearable proximity, the pervasive, lingering metallic tang of old, dried blood that seems to have permanently seeped into the very stones of this place, the sharp, acrid reek of ammonia from overflowing latrine buckets in the corner, and something else, something sour and vaguely rotten that you can't quite identify, but definitely don't want to investigate any further. This isn't a particularly vivid nightmare, and it's certainly not some elaborate Hollywood movie set where a benevolent director will eventually yell, "Cut!" and you can retreat to your air-conditioned trailer for a chilled bottle of water and a protein bar. This, my unfortunate friend, is your new, inescapable, and probably very short-lived reality. So, where exactly are you in this olfactory hell? You're in a ludus, a gladiator school. The name sounds almost respectable, doesn't it? Educational, even. Perhaps you're picturing a stern but ultimately fair and wise mentor, a Roman equivalent of some cinematic martial arts master who will patiently unlock your hidden potential and teach you the ancient, esoteric secrets of combat. You can wipe that charming, utterly misleading image from your mind right this instant. Think instead along the lines of a maximum security prison combined with the most brutal, soul-crushing, physically demanding boot camp imaginable, a place run by callous, pragmatic men whose only discernible interest in your continued well-being extends precisely to whether you can still stand upright, bleed in an entertaining fashion for the crowds, and perhaps die in a sufficiently spectacular and memorable manner. And who are you, this new arrival in this charmingly grim establishment? Well, let's be brutally honest. You're almost certainly not here by choice, not a willing volunteer for this particular career path. The overwhelming majority of gladiators were slaves, the human spoils of Rome's relentless wars, captured in some distant, newly conquered land, their villages razed, their families scattered to the winds, killed or sold off to other fates. Or you might be a condemned criminal, offered a grim and cynical choice by a Roman magistrate, a relatively swift, unceremonious execution out of the public eye, or a slightly slower, infinitely more public, and spectacularly humiliating one in the arena, a chance to entertain your way to oblivion. What a magnificent opportunity. A very small, usually utterly desperate, or arguably clinically insane minority were the auctorati. These were free men, sometimes even Roman citizens who had fallen on incredibly hard times, who volunteered for this life, signing away their freedom, their legal rights, and essentially their entire personhood for a contracted period, usually a few years. They would swear the Sacramentum Gladiatorium, a terrifying and binding oath, vowing to be burned with fire, to be bound in chains, to be beaten with rods, and to be killed by the sword, if so ordered by their lanista or the editor of the games. Why would any sane person do this? Perhaps for a chance at substantial prize money, a desperate way out of crushing debt, or for the fleeting, dangerous, and addictive intoxication of fame and adoration from the crowds. Sounds like a truly fantastic career move, doesn't it? Especially the killed by the sword clause in the contract. Forget any notions of personal freedom, individual dignity, or bodily autonomy that you once cherished. Your previous life? It's gone, wiped clean, erased as if it never existed. Your name? Probably changed by your new owners. You'll be given something suitably fierce-sounding, exotic, or perhaps cruelly ironic. Ursus the bear, Triumphus the victorious, Ferox the fierce, or maybe Pulcher the handsome, if they're feeling particularly sarcastic about your current battered state. You are now, in the cold, unblinking eyes of Roman law and society, res, a thing, a piece of property, no different in legal standing from a cart horse, a plough, or a side of beef hanging in a butcher's shop. Your body isn't your own anymore. It belongs entirely and unequivocally to your lanista, the owner, manager, and chief trainer of the ludus. He's invested in you, true, but not in the way a supportive parent invests in a child's education and future. He's invested in you in the same way a butcher invests in livestock he plans to take to market for slaughter and sale. Your entire value is measured solely and brutally in your ability to fight, to endure unimaginable pain and hardship, and ultimately to die in a way that pleases the roaring, bloodthirsty crowd and brings profit to your owner. There's no human resources department here to file a grievance about unsafe working conditions. There's no workers' compensation for that gaping, festering wound in your leg. There's certainly no anonymous suggestion box for improving ludus morale and well-being. Just the ever-present, looming threat of the whip, the cold, heavy clanking weight of chains, and the constant, grinding, soul-crushing reality of your new, exceedingly precarious, and almost certainly short-lived existence. And let's take a moment to discuss those little modern comforts you so blithely took for granted. Privacy? That's a forgotten luxury, a word that has absolutely no meaning in this context. You're crammed into small, dark, damp cells, or perhaps sprawling, fetid barracks with dozens of other men. It's a volatile, testosterone-fueled, fear-soaked environment, a simmering stew of traumatized individuals, hardened soldiers from defeated armies still seething with resentment, sullen rebels captured in far-flung provinces, and terrified common criminals, all packed together like cattle in a pressure cooker of aggression, suspicion, and profound, bone-deep despair. Personal hygiene? You'll wash when and where you're told, most likely in a trough of cold, dirty, shared water, using communal facilities that would make a modern health inspector not just faint, but probably resign on the spot and seek therapy. Sanitation, to put it mildly, is rudimentary. Think open drains, if you're lucky, or just overflowing buckets in the corner that get emptied. Eventually, when the stench becomes utterly unbearable even for the hardened guards. Unsurprisingly, disease spreads like wildfire in these cramped, unhygienic conditions. Dysentery is your constant, unwelcome companion, leaving you weak and dehydrated. Skin infections, boils, lice, and scabies are rampant. Respiratory illnesses, fevers of unknown origin, and infections from minor cuts and abrasions are all part of the standard ludus experience. A simple cut, not even from an opponent's sword in training, but perhaps from a rusty nail protruding from your cell wall or a sharp stone in the dusty training yard, could easily lead to a raging, limb-threatening infection. And there's no friendly neighborhood doctor with a ready supply of antibiotics, sterile bandages, and antiseptic wipes. Your medical care, if you receive any significant kind beyond a cursory glance, and perhaps a splash of sour wine on a wound, is purely functional. Its sole purpose is to get you patched up and back on your feet, back into the training yard, and ultimately back into the arena as quickly as possible, because a sick or injured gladiator isn't earning his keep for the lanista. The problem, stark, brutal, and utterly unavoidable, is this: you are a gladiator. Your entire purpose, your very reason for drawing one more ragged, painful breath, is to entertain the Roman populace through organized, ritualized, lethal violence. Your life expectancy has just plummeted to terrifyingly low levels. Your new, non-negotiable job description involves daily exposure to extreme physical hardship, the constant, imminent threat of grievous injury or agonizing death, and the crushing, inescapable psychological burden of knowing that you are, in the grand scheme of the Roman entertainment industry, utterly disposable. Survival isn't just a laudable goal. It's a daily, desperate, minute-by-minute struggle against overwhelming odds, against your highly motivated and equally desperate opponents, against your own failing, protesting body, and against a vast, impersonal, and ruthlessly efficient system specifically designed to consume you for sport. Welcome to the show. It's probably not going to be a long run for most of you. Now, let's get properly acquainted with your new boss, the formidable figure who holds your life, quite literally, in the palm of his calloused, powerful hand, the lanista. He's not just your trainer. He's your owner, your warden, your talent manager, your provisioner, your disciplinarian, and potentially your executioner, all wrapped up in one intimidating, probably scarred, package. Don't expect a warm, welcoming handshake, a supportive orientation session about company values, or an encouraging pep talk about achieving your personal best and contributing to team success. His primary, if not sole, concern is return on his financial investment. You are an asset, a piece of walking, fighting, bleeding meat, albeit a fragile and potentially messy one that requires a certain amount of upkeep. He either bought you at a slave auction, perhaps picking you out of a miserable chained line of defeated captives with a practiced eye for physique and ferocity, or he acquired your contract if you were one of those desperate auctorati who signed their lives away. And now, his all-consuming job is to whip you into fighting shape, or at least into dying in an interesting and crowd-pleasing, and therefore profitable way shape, before you inconveniently expire from dysentery in your cell, succumb to despair and take your own life, or simply get yourself accidentally killed by a fellow trainee in a fit of uncontrolled rage during a sparring session. His demeanor is likely to be harsh, unyielding, and utterly unforgiving, his discipline unwavering and frequently brutal. He's seen countless men like you come and go, an endless conveyor belt of human misery and shattered dreams passing through the gates of his establishment. He knows from long, hard, and probably bloody experience that coddling won't make you an effective killer, nor will it make you a suitably dramatic or resilient victim. Fear, relentless physical pain, and endless, mind-numbing, repetitive drilling are his preferred, time-tested tools of instruction. He, or his hired trainers, often grizzled, scarred ex-gladiators who somehow, against all odds, managed to survive the arena long enough to earn their freedom, the doctores, will push you far beyond what you previously thought were your absolute physical and mental limits. Think of the most terrifying, demanding, and verbally abusive gym instructor you can possibly imagine, then give that instructor a heavy, stinging whip, absolute legal authority over your life and limb without any recourse or appeal, and a very direct, personal financial interest in your continued suffering and your eventual bloody demise. That's a reasonable starting point for understanding the lanista and his training staff. He might not be personally sadistic in every instance, though some undoubtedly were, clearly relishing the power they held over other human beings. But his entire business model, the very foundation of his livelihood, is predicated on systematic brutality, constant intimidation, and the ever-present threat of extreme violence. So, what's on the rigorous curriculum at this charming institution of higher suffering and applied pain? Your training, your doctrina, isn't some elegant, flowing, spiritually enlightening martial art focused on self-improvement and inner peace. It's a brutal, repetitive, physically punishing, and utterly exhausting regimen designed with one singular, overarching goal in mind: to turn you into a functional killing machine, or, failing that laudable objective, a convincingly terrified and ultimately dispatched victim who at least puts on a good show before expiring. You'll likely start your training with the palace. This is a sturdy wooden pole, perhaps 6 Roman feet high, a bit shorter than 6 modern feet, driven firmly into the hard-packed earth of the training yard. Your delightful task? To attack this inanimate, unresisting object relentlessly for hours upon grueling hours, day after day, with a heavy wooden practice sword, the rudis. This training sword is often deliberately weighted with inserts of lead to make it significantly heavier than a real iron or steel gladius. The idea behind this monotonous torture is to build up your brute strength, your raw endurance, your ability to keep swinging that heavy weapon with some measure of force, even when your arms feel like they're about to detach from your shoulders and your lungs are burning as if filled with hot coals. It's about drilling basic, fundamental strikes, parries, and blocks into your muscle memory until you can perform them instinctively, without conscious thought, even when you're half-blinded by your own sweat and sheer, unadulterated terror in the deafening, disorienting roar of the arena. Forget those inspiring Hollywood training montages, usually set to an uplifting power ballad, where the plucky underdog hero masters complex fight-winning moves and develops rippling abdominal muscles in a matter of days. This is a grind, a monotonous, mind-numbing, painful, soul-destroying grind. Hours and hours, day after relentless, sun-baked day, you'll be out there in the training yard, under the scorching Italian sun that bakes the dusty ground until it's as hard as rock, or perhaps in a dim, damp, enclosed space if the weather is foul and prevents outdoor activity. Your muscles will scream in constant protest. Your joints will ache with a deep, throbbing, relentless pain. Your hands will be blistered, raw, chafed, and probably bleeding from gripping the rough hilt of the heavy wooden sword for so long. Every mistake, every dropped guard, every moment of hesitation or perceived laziness, every sign of insufficient effort will be met with a sharp, stinging word of abuse, a painful, bruising blow from the trainer's ever-present staff, or worse, a lash from the whip that cracks like thunder and bites like fire. You'll practice footwork until your ankles are swollen and protesting, balance drills until your core muscles quiver uncontrollably with exhaustion. You'll learn how to use a shield, not just as a passive piece of defense to hide behind, but as an offensive weapon, a tool for bashing, unbalancing, and creating openings in your opponent's guard. You'll even learn how to fall correctly, how to take a hit and roll with it, because you will be hit often and hard, even in these supposedly safe training sessions. Sparring sessions with your fellow trainees are not gentle, friendly, cooperative exercises designed for mutual learning. While they are often fought with blunted or wooden weapons to avoid immediately fatal injuries, dead trainees are, after all, a bad investment for the lanista, they are still incredibly dangerous and brutally competitive. Broken fingers, cracked ribs, dislocated shoulders, concussions that leave you dizzy and nauseous for days, deep, painful bruises that turn your skin into a roadmap of purple, black, and green. These are just considered part of the normal learning process, routine occupational hazards in your new profession. Too bad for you if that broken finger gets hideously infected and swells up like a rotten sausage, throbbing with pain. You're expected to suck it up, ignore the agony, and keep training, or face even worse consequences for malingering or weakness. And the discipline? It's iron. It has to be, to control such a volatile and desperate group of men. Disobedience, insubordination, even a fleeting hint of laziness or a sullen, resentful look is met with swift, severe, and often very public punishment designed to make an example of you. Flogging is a common disciplinary tool, the leather thongs of the whip or the stinging bite of rods tearing at the skin on your back and legs, leaving permanent, raised, ugly scars that serve as a constant, visible reminder of your status and the consequences of defiance. Solitary confinement in a dark, cramped, filthy cell for days or even weeks on end, subsisting on nothing but stale bread and brackish water, is another popular option. Being put in heavy, galling iron chains, restricting your movement and adding to your daily misery and humiliation. The lanista needs to maintain absolute, unquestioned, and terrifying control over his volatile human inventory. Any spark of defiance, if left unchecked, could spread like a disease through the ranks, and a rebellious gladiator is not only a worthless financial investment, but a potentially very dangerous one, capable of inciting others. You learn very quickly, through painful experience, to obey without question, to endure without complaint, at least outwardly, to swallow your pride, your simmering anger, and your ever-present, gnawing pain. Your spirit might be screaming in silent, impotent rebellion, but your body learns to comply, to go through the motions. It's a perverse, brutal, and deeply dehumanizing kind of education, where the lessons are not written in books or absorbed through intellectual understanding, but are etched directly, painfully, and permanently into your skin, your bones, your muscles, and your very psyche. Now, let's turn our attention to the crucial matter of fueling this human fighting machine, this expendable piece of arena fodder. You might be picturing a carefully calibrated, scientifically designed, high-protein diet fit for an elite modern athlete, lean cuts of meat, fresh, vitamin-rich vegetables, complex carbohydrates for sustained energy. You can disabuse yourself of that pleasant fantasy right now. The staple of your diet, the culinary highlight of your miserable, monotonous day, is likely to be barley. Yes, you heard that correctly, barley. So much barley, in fact, that gladiators were often derisively referred to by contemporary Roman satirists and writers as hordieri, literally barley men, a term loaded with connotations of coarseness and low status. You'll get your barley ration as a thick, unappetizing, lumpy mush, a bland, tasteless porridge, or perhaps baked into some incredibly coarse, dense, and heavy bread that tastes remarkably like sawdust and requires considerable effort to chew and swallow. Why barley, you might reasonably ask? Surely lean muscle mass fueled by ample protein is better for fighting effectively. Not necessarily from the lanista's pragmatic, coldly calculating, cost-conscious perspective. Barley is, above all, cheap. It's also very filling, staving off the worst hunger pangs on a budget. And it has a particular, rather gruesome, physiological effect that the lanista actually desires. It helps to lay down a noticeable layer of subcutaneous fat over your muscles. Why would he want you to be fatter, not leaner? That layer of fat provides a bit of extra padding, a sort of natural built-in cushioning over your muscles, nerves, and superficial blood vessels. This means that superficial cuts into this fatty layer, while they look incredibly spectacular and dramatic to the crowd, producing lots of satisfyingly red blood, which the audience absolutely loves, are less likely to be immediately debilitating, disabling, or fatal. It's a grotesque, cynical form of battlefield medicine delivered through diet, a way to make you last a few crucial moments longer in the arena, to bleed more dramatically and entertainingly before a more serious, fight-ending injury finally takes you down. It also means you're probably carrying extra, non-functional weight, which doesn't exactly help with agility, speed, or long-term stamina in a protracted fight. But hey, your survivability for a few more crucial, entertaining minutes, allowing for a more dramatic and satisfying spectacle for the paying customers, is what really counts in the Lannister's profit and loss ledger. You might also receive some beans, another cheap and readily available source of calories and a modicum of protein. Perhaps some wilted, unappetizing vegetables if you're exceptionally lucky that day, or if the Lannister managed to get a particularly good deal at the local market. But meat? Meat is a rare and precious treat, reserved perhaps for the night before a major fight, as a supposed strength booster, if at all, and even then, probably not the choicest cuts. Forget carefully balanced macronutrients, essential vitamin and mineral supplements, or specially formulated electrolyte drinks to aid recovery. This is basic, unadorned survival fare, the cheapest possible way to keep you alive and functioning at a minimal level, albeit miserably, on an extremely tight budget. It's monotonous, bland, unappetizing, and probably contributes significantly to a general feeling of lethargy, malaise, and chronic indigestion, not to mention the delightful olfactory consequences of a diet so heavy in barley and beans in such close, unventilated communal living quarters, another charming aspect of your daily life. Imagine eating the same unappetizing, unidentifiable slop day in, day out for months or even years, while simultaneously being physically pushed to your absolute limit and beyond. It's not exactly a recipe for high morale, peak physical condition in the modern sense, or a sunny disposition. Congratulations. As an added bonus, you also get to rot your teeth out faster than the average peasant, thanks to all those simple carbohydrates in the barley, and there's definitely no dental plan included in your comprehensive gladiator benefits package. A raging toothache is just another delightful pain to endure stoically. And what about your social life? Your connections to other human beings? In this charming new environment, you are now, whether you like it or not, part of a very exclusive, very dangerous, and deeply dysfunctional club. You live in incredibly close, unsanitary, and often tense quarters, with a motley collection of other men from all conceivable walks of life, a veritable United Nations of misery and misfortune. There are captured soldiers from the wild, untamed forests of Germany, their eyes still burning with fierce resentment and a longing for their lost freedom. There are Thracian rebels, proud, sullen, and dangerous. Numidian deserters from Rome's auxiliary forces, quick, wiry, and unpredictable. Gauls, Britons, Dacians, Iberians, men from every corner of Rome's sprawling, ever-expanding empire, and even beyond its borders, all brought together by the cruel whims of fate and the insatiable Roman appetite for bloody spectacle. And yes, mixed in among them, even some down-on-their-luck Romans, the Octorati, who have ostensibly chosen this path out of extreme desperation, or perhaps a deeply disturbed sense of bravado. The only things you all truly, undeniably have in common are your current miserable, captive predicament and the chilling, ever-present, unspoken knowledge that you might have to try and kill each other in the arena tomorrow or next week or next month for the amusement of thousands of complete strangers. Legally, and this is a crucial point, you are infamous. This is a significant Roman legal and social concept. It means you are publicly shamed, officially disgraced, and stripped of most of your fundamental civil rights as a human being. You can't vote in elections, you can't hold any form of public office, you can't make a legally binding will in the usual way, you can't even testify as a witness in a court of law without first undergoing torture, as your uncoerced word is considered inherently untrustworthy and without value. You are, in the eyes of polite, respectable Roman society, on the same social and moral level as prostitutes, actors who were also considered disreputable, pimps, and other providers of public pleasure. Figures who might, paradoxically, achieve a certain level of popular fame or even adoration from the masses, but who are simultaneously considered morally compromised, socially outcast, and fundamentally lesser than upstanding citizens. So, while the crowds in the amphitheatre might roar your new, fierce-sounding gladiator name with enthusiastic approval if you put on a particularly good, bloody show, don't ever expect an invitation to a sophisticated senator's refined dinner party. Unless, of course, you're on the menu as the after-dinner entertainment, fighting to the death on the mosaic floor of his private villa for the amusement of his jaded guests. Your comrades in the ludus, these other condemned, brutalized, and deeply traumatized men, are your only real, albeit highly problematic, social circle. Bonds do form, of course, under such extreme and unrelenting pressure. Shared suffering, shared fear, shared resentment of your captors and your cruel fate, these powerful, primal emotions have a strange way of creating unexpected, sometimes intense, connections between individuals who would otherwise have nothing in common. You might find a friend, someone to watch your back during the chaotic, dangerous melees of training sessions, someone to share a grim, gallows humor joke with over your evening bowl of lumpy barley slop. But there's always, inevitably, an undercurrent of profound tension, a poisonous shadow of mistrust and potential betrayal. The man you share your meager rations with today, the one you confide your deepest fears to in the dead of night when you think no one else is listening, could very well be the man facing you across the blood-soaked arena sand next week, armed with a freshly sharpened piece of steel and an equally desperate primal need to survive at any cost, even yours. That unspoken, chilling knowledge adds a certain unavoidable, heart-pounding frisson to all your daily interactions. It's a social dynamic that's part trauma support group, part death row waiting room, part perpetual, simmering, barely suppressed rivalry. Trust is an incredibly rare and precious commodity in this environment, a dangerous vulnerability, a luxury that few can truly afford to indulge in for long if they wish to see another sunrise. So, you've somehow managed to survive the brutalizing, dehumanizing training regimen, or at least you're still standing, a collection of bruises, scars, and chronic aches, and you haven't yet succumbed to disease or despair. You've choked down your daily ration of bland, unappetizing barley gruel without, openly, gagging, day after tedious day. Now it's time to understand the so-called rules of the deadly game you're being inexorably forced to play, and to get a clearer, more cynical picture of the charming societal structures, power dynamics, and economic imperatives that keep this whole bloody, barbaric circus rolling relentlessly forward across the Roman world. The arena, contrary to some popular, action-packed depictions of chaotic brawls, isn't always just a lawless, uncontrolled free-for-all where anything goes. There are rules, of a sort, or at least there are established procedures, traditions, and expectations that govern the proceedings. The primary rule, however, unspoken but universally understood by everyone from the emperor himself down to the poorest, most disenfranchised spectator, perched precariously in the nosebleed seats of the amphitheatre, is this: thou shalt entertain the crowd. Fail at that fundamental, non-negotiable imperative, and no other rule, no matter how meticulously observed or technically fulfilled, will matter in the slightest. Your fate will be swiftly and pitilessly sealed by popular acclaim, or lack thereof. In most formal arena combats, particularly the prestigious ones, there's usually a referee, or sometimes two, known as the summa rudis. He's typically an experienced, grizzled, retired gladiator who somehow managed to survive long enough in the arena to earn his freedom, identifiable by his distinct, often colourful tunic and the long staff, or rod rudis, the same name as the wooden sword, symbolizing freedom. that he carries as a badge of his office. He's ostensibly there to enforce the specific rules of that particular bout, as different types of gladiators fought under different sets of established constraints and with different objectives. To fairly stop a fight, if one gladiator is clearly disabled, incapacitated, or signals surrender in the approved manner, and, crucially, to interpret the often ambiguous will of the roaring crowd or, more importantly, the definitive judgment of the editor, the wealthy, influential individual who is sponsoring, presiding over, and paying for the games. Sometimes the summa rudis intervenes to separate combatants if they're locked in a dull, unexciting stalemate that's boring the crowd, or to ensure that they're actually fighting with sufficient vigor, aggression, and visible effort, and not just, say, politely circling each other at a safe distance, hoping the other guy spontaneously combusts, has a convenient heart attack, or simply faints from heat exhaustion. But his authority, however imposing he might appear, is always secondary, and often subservient, to the baying, bloodthirsty mob and the powerful man bankrolling the entire expensive spectacle. If the crowd is roaring for blood, and the editor is nodding his imperial approval, the summa rudis isn't going to argue too strenuously for a tea break, a disqualification on a minor technicality, or an early stoppage due to excessive bleeding. His primary job is to facilitate the smooth running of the show, to ensure the entertainment flows, not to prioritize your personal well-being or the strict adherence to a dusty rulebook. Signaling surrender is a critical, terrifying, and highly ritualized moment in any gladiatorial contest. If you're wounded, disarmed, utterly exhausted, or simply overwhelmed by your opponent's relentless assault, you can drop your weapon and shield, if you have one, and raise your left hand, often with the index finger extended upwards. This is the ad digitum plea, a direct, public appeal for mercy, for your life. At this dramatic point, the fight usually pauses, and the victor typically steps back, awaiting the verdict. Now, all eyes, thousands upon thousands of them, turn from you, the defeated, bleeding figure on the sand, to the editor, who is usually seated in a prominent, decorated box. He, in turn, will almost invariably gauge the mood of the crowd, listening to their roars, observing their gestures. Will their collective verdict be missio, release, remission, permission to live, and, if you recover, fight another day? Or jugula, literally, throat, the chilling, unambiguous order to kill the defeated gladiator on the spot? The crowd roars its collective preference, a deafening wave of sound. They might wave handkerchiefs, scarves, or white cloths as a sign for mercy, or, more famously and ominously, they might give the thumbs-down gesture, though, as previously noted, some historians argue it might have been a thumb pointed upwards, like a drawn sword, or even a thumb jabbed towards their own throat. The exact gesture is still a subject of scholarly debate. To demand your death. Imagine that unbearable pressure, that gut-wrenching suspense. Your life, hanging precariously in the balance, dependent entirely on the collective, fickle whim of thousands of complete strangers. Their momentous decision could be based on how bravely or skillfully you fought, how dramatically you're currently bleeding, whether you showed appropriate spirit and courage even in defeat, or simply whether they're having a good day and feeling unusually magnanimous, or if they're bored, irritable, and craving a definitive, bloody conclusion to the entertainment. It is the ultimate, terrifying, life or death public opinion poll, and you are the unwilling subject. Now, let's talk a little more about the charming hierarchy within this brutal world of institutionalized pain, and the specialized equipment you'll be forced to wield, often against your better judgment or natural aptitude. Not all gladiators are created equal in terms of status, equipment, or fighting style, and you certainly don't get to leisurely browse a catalogue and pick your preferred specialization like choosing a character class in your favorite role-playing video game. Your lanista, or his specialized trainers, doctores, will assign you a particular gladiator type. This crucial decision will be based on a number of factors: your physique, are you big and strong, suitable for heavy armor, or small, quick and agile, better suited for lighter gear? Your ethnic origin, as some nationalities were stereotypically associated with certain fighting styles or weapons, or sometimes simply for the sheer novelty, dramatic potential, or visual appeal of a specific matchup the lanista wants to stage for an upcoming games. Are you a big, brawny, powerfully built individual? Perhaps you'll be kitted out as a murmillo. This heavily armed and armored type typically carried a large, heavy, rectangular shield, the scutum, very similar to that used by Roman legionaries, a short, thrusting sword, the gladius, and wore a distinctive, heavy bronze helmet, often elaborately decorated with a prominent fish crest, hence the name, from mormilos, a type of sea fish. Or maybe your destiny is to become a secutor, the chaser, or pursuer. The secutor was a specialized type, specifically developed and rigorously trained to fight against one particular, iconic opponent, the retiarius. His equipment included a scutum, a gladius, and a very smooth, relatively featureless, egg-shaped helmet, with only very small round eye holes, a design intended to prevent the retiarius's entangling net from snagging on any protrusions. Ah, the retiarius, the net man. He's one of the most visually recognizable, unique, and often crowd-pleasing gladiator types. He fought almost naked, very lightly armored, usually with just a metal shoulder guard, gallerus, on his left arm to protect his neck and face when he thrust with his trident, and sometimes a simple loincloth, subligaculum. His primary weapons were a heavily weighted net, ret, which he would attempt to cast over his opponent, a long, three-pronged trident, fusina or tridens, and a small, sharp dagger, pugio, for desperate close-quarters work if his other weapons failed him or were lost. His entire fighting style was based on agility, speed, evasion, and keeping his distance from his more heavily armored foe. His goal was to skillfully entangle his opponent in the net, immobilizing him, then move in with the trident for the kill. He was quick and nimble, but incredibly vulnerable if he missed with the net, or if his heavily armored opponent managed to weather the initial assault and close the distance, negating his reach advantage and bringing superior armor and weaponry to bear. The matchups in the arena were often deliberately, almost scientifically, unbalanced, or stylistically contrasted, to create a specific kind of spectacle, a compelling visual narrative for the eager crowd. The heavily armored, relentless secutor versus the nimble, lightly equipped, evasive retiarius is a classic pursuer versus pursued drama, a thrilling contest of brute strength and ponderous endurance against lightning speed, cunning, and skillful weapon play. It's rarely, if ever, about a fair fight, in the modern sense of evenly matched combatants. It's about meticulously engineering a good, engaging, and memorable show that will keep the audience on the edge of their seats, roaring their approval or disapproval. Then there were numerous other, equally specialized types. The Thrakes, Thracian, equipped in a style reminiscent of the fierce warriors from the Roman province of Thrace, wore a distinctive crested helmet, often featuring a griffin protome, carried a small, usually square or sometimes round shield, parmula, and wielded a short, wickedly curved sword, psycha, specifically designed to slash around an opponent's shield and inflict nasty, bleeding wounds. The Hoplomachus, as the name clearly suggests, was equipped to resemble a classical Greek hoplite soldier, fighting with a thrusting spear, hasta, a short sword for backup, and a small, round shield, often paired against a murmillo to recreate mythical or historical Greek versus Roman battles for the edification of the historically minded spectators. Sometimes, For particularly grand or novelty-driven games, the editor might present even more exotic, unusual, or downright bizarre types of gladiators. There was the Esidarius, who fought from a two-wheeled British-style war chariot, a sedum, a throwback to earlier, more mobile forms of warfare, requiring considerable skill to control the horses and fight simultaneously. And then there was the andabata, perhaps the cruelest and most absurd joke of all in the gladiatorial repertoire. The andabata was forced to fight wearing a helmet with no eye holes whatsoever, completely blind, reduced to blindly flailing with his weapons in the general direction of his equally sightless opponent, hoping to make contact by sheer luck. Hilarious, right? A real crowd pleaser for those with a particularly dark sense of humor. Unless, of course, you're one of the poor, disoriented souls stumbling around in the dark, sweat pouring down your face inside your sensory deprivation helmet, waiting for an unseen, unexpected blow to end your misery. Your equipment, remember, isn't chosen for your personal comfort, your optimal combat efficiency, or even your long-term survival. It's chosen almost entirely for its visual appeal to the crowd, its traditional associations with certain peoples or fighting styles, and its ability to create specific dramatic tensions and predictable, or sometimes delightfully unpredictable, outcomes. Your very life depends on your ability to master, or at least competently wield, gear that might be inherently awkward, dangerously unbalanced, or deliberately mismatched against your designated opponents. And who's pulling all the financial and political strings behind this elaborate, state-sanctioned, empire-wide slaughterhouse? That would be the editor muneris, the giver or sponsor of the games. This influential individual could be the emperor himself, seeking to bolster his popularity with the masses and distract them from less palatable realities. It could be a wealthy, ambitious senator, currying favor with the urban populace of Rome, or a local magistrate in a provincial town, hoping to advance his political career by staging a memorable and generous spectacle for his constituents. Or it could simply be a rich local bigwig, a member of the provincial elite, eager to show off his immense wealth, his civic mindedness, and his generosity to his fellow citizens. These games, these munera, originally meaning duties or offerings, often connected to funeral rites, were a potent, if deeply cynical tool of social control, political maneuvering, and personal advancement, a key component of the infamous bread and circuses, panem et circenses, policy. Keep the masses reasonably well fed with subsidized grain and thoroughly entertained with bloody, thrilling spectacles, and they're far less likely to riot over inconvenient things like crushing taxes, rampant political corruption, military disasters on distant frontiers, or the general oppressiveness of the regime. Your suffering, your blood, your courage, your fear, your potential agonizing death is a carefully calculated political investment, a public relations exercise. The editor decides the scale and lavishness of the games, how many pairs of gladiators will fight each day, what exotic and expensive animals will be hunted and slaughtered in the venaciones, wild beast hunts, that often preceded the main gladiatorial combats. He decides the crucial pairings of gladiators, often consulting closely with various lanistae to create the most exciting, evenly matched, or dramatically contrasting matchups that are most likely to please the crowd and generate buzz. And ultimately, though he is wise to heed the vociferous expressions of the crowd, he usually has the final, absolute say on the matter of life or death, vita et mors, for the defeated gladiators. He wants to be popular after all. Blatantly ignoring a clear and overwhelming popular verdict could be politically damaging, even dangerous. So, he's constantly looking for thrilling contests, dramatic reversals of fortune, conspicuous displays of courage, or equally entertaining displays of abject cowardice, and, of course, plenty of satisfyingly visible gore. He's not your friend. He's not your advocate. He is your ultimate consumer, and you, the gladiator, are the perishable product. Your expiry date is entirely at his, and by extension the crowd's unpredictable discretion. The pressure to perform, to be memorable, to put on a good death, if it tragically comes to that, is immense and unrelenting. A dull, uninspired, overly cautious fight is almost worse than a quick, clean, decisive defeat, because a dull survivor, one who failed to ignite the passions of the crowd, might not be granted missio the next time he finds himself at their mercy. The crowd might remember your lackluster performance and angrily demand your demise as punishment for boring them. You have to be a star, a compelling, charismatic performer, a master of stagecraft and violence, even as you're fighting for your very last ragged breath, with blood in your eyes, dust in your throat, and a cold, primal terror gripping your heart. So, how do you even begin to cope, to mentally survive in this waking nightmare, this daily, relentless dance with a violent and public death? What are the desperate strategies, the meager tools, the fragile mental tricks you might desperately employ to navigate this treacherous, unforgiving world where every sunrise could genuinely, without exaggeration, be your last? Let's be perfectly clear from the outset. Coping in this context doesn't mean finding inner peace, achieving profound personal growth, or developing a healthy work-life balance with appropriate self-care routines. It means finding rudimentary ways to endure, to numb the pain and fear, to delay the inevitable, and maybe, just maybe, through some unlikely combination of hard-won skill, sheer animal cunning, and an incredible amount of blind luck, to survive one more day, one more fight, one more blood-soaked, dust-choked afternoon in the arena. First, there are the literal tools of your trade, your weapons and armor, such as they are. Don't get any romantic, heroic notions about perfectly balanced, master-crafted swords forged by legendary smiths, or impenetrable, gleaming suits of armor handed down through generations of noble, chivalrous warriors. Your gear is often as much a part of the spectacle, specifically designed for visual effect, and sometimes even to create deliberate, exploitable vulnerabilities, as it is a means of genuine, effective protection. Helmets, for instance, are frequently elaborate, heavy, and incredibly ornate, designed to look impressive from a distance. But they can also severely restrict your vision, muffling your hearing and making it dangerously difficult to discern the subtle sounds of your opponent's movements, the shifting mood of the crowd, or the shouted warnings or instructions from the summa rudis. Imagine trying to fight for your life while peering out of a pair of tiny, narrow eye slits, your own hot, ragged breath echoing deafeningly in the confined metal space, sweat stinging your eyes and blurring what little you can actually see, and the roar of the unseen surrounding crowd a muffled, disorienting, terrifying, omnipresent din. Some helmets, like the Murmillo's with its wide, protective brim and distinctive fish crest, are so large and cumbersome that while they offer good protection to the head, face and neck, they come at the significant cost of severely limited peripheral vision and considerable, exhausting neck strain from the sheer weight of the metal. Others, like the smooth, almost featureless visored helmet of the Secutor, are specifically designed to be as streamlined as possible to avoid being snagged by the Retiarius's treacherous net, but those tiny, restrictive eye holes offer a profoundly limited field of view, making you acutely vulnerable to an agile, quick-moving opponent. Your armor, too, such as it is often more about show and creating a specific look than about providing comprehensive practical defense. The manica, a segmented arm guard typically worn on the sword arm, and the ocreae, protective greaves for the legs, often only one on the leading leg, leaving the other dangerously exposed, offer some vital protection to those specific limbs, but also leave significant portions of your torso, back, and other limbs dangerously unprotected. Why these glaring, seemingly illogical gaps in protection? Because, quite simply, wounds are an integral, expected, and highly appreciated part of the show. A dramatic, bloody gash on an unarmored thigh, a deep chest wound that just misses the vital organs but bleeds profusely and satisfyingly. These are the moments the crowd pays its hard-earned sesterces to see. Perfect, impenetrable, all-encompassing defense makes for a boring, drawn-out, and ultimately unsatisfying fight. And boredom, as we've noted, is the mortal enemy of the editor and the lanista. So, you learn, through painful trial and error, to use what you're given, to understand its inherent weaknesses as much as its strengths, to compensate for its flaws and limitations through superior skill, desperate improvisation, and a healthy dose of luck. Your shield, if you are assigned one, becomes a dynamic extension of your body, not just a passive piece of metal or wood for blocking incoming blows, but an offensive weapon in its own right, a tool for bashing, unbalancing, and creating momentary openings in your opponent's guard. Your sword, be it the straight, thrusting gladius favoured by legionaries, or the short, curved, slashing psyker of the Thracian, must feel like a natural, responsive part of your arm, wielded with deadly precision, speed, and a desperate, unwavering intent. These aren't just inanimate objects, they are your only, fragile, often inadequate lifeline in a sea of violence. And they stink. They stink of old, dried, caked-on sweat, cheap, rancid leather polish, the faint, persistent tang of oxidizing metal, and the even more faint yet ever-present, coppery, metallic smell of old, dried blood that never quite washes out, no matter how vigorously they're scoured between fights. Then there's the relentless, exhausting, and absolutely crucial mental game. How do you face the near certainty of a violent, painful, and public death on a daily basis and not completely fall apart, succumbing to paralyzing madness, gibbering terror, or total, crushing despair? Some gladiators undoubtedly did. Suicide in the ludus, while perhaps not commonplace, was certainly not unheard of. The Roman orator Quintus Aurelius Symmachus, in a famous and often quoted letter from the late 4th century CE, recounts the shocking story of a group of newly imported Saxon gladiators who, on the very morning they were due to make their grand debut in the arena, chose to strangle each other to death in their locked cells rather than face the public slaughter and humiliation that awaited them. For those who somehow managed to endure, perhaps it was a kind of grim, hardened, fatalistic stoic acceptance, a profound and soul-weary fatalism born of their utterly hopeless and inescapable circumstances. You learn, out of sheer necessity, to focus entirely and exclusively on the immediate, the tangible, the next few seconds, the next grueling training drill, the next meager, unappetizing meal, the next ragged, precious breath. You compartmentalize the fear, the trauma, the grief, pushing it down, down, down into some dark, locked corner of your mind, at least for a little while, long enough to function. Religion and superstition also played a significant, if often desperate, part in the daily lives of many gladiators. A large number were particularly devoted to Nemesis, the powerful, implacable goddess of divine retribution, fate, justice, and cosmic balance, who was often very closely associated with the arena, the games, and the often arbitrary nature of life and death within its walls. You might scratch a crude, hopeful prayer to her on the grimy, damp wall of your shared cell, wear a cheap, roughly made amulet bearing her image or one of her symbols, like a wheel or a griffin, or perform some small, intensely personal, and probably idiosyncratic ritual before stepping out onto the hot, unforgiving sand of the arena, desperately hoping to sway fickle, blind fortune in your favor. Even for a few crucial, life-altering moments, it's a desperate, very human grasp for some tiny, illusory measure of control, some sliver of agency or hope in a world where you have almost none. Maybe you develop a personal mantra, a specific, repetitive pre-fight routine, meticulously checking your weapon bindings, spitting on the ground in a certain way, whispering a potent curse against your opponent or a prayer to a forgotten childhood god. Anything, absolutely anything, to keep the encroaching, paralyzing, mind-numbing terror at bay for just a little longer, to allow you to function. And what about camaraderie? Those fragile, precious, and incredibly dangerous bonds that sometimes formed in the fiery crucible of shared suffering and impending doom. As mentioned before, you live cheek by jowl, day and night, in the most intimate and squalid conditions, with these other condemned, brutalized, and deeply traumatized men. Sometimes, against all odds and all logic, genuine bonds of friendship, loyalty, and mutual support could form. Epitaphs on gladiators' tombstones, often commissioned and paid for by their surviving comrades, sodales, sometimes speak movingly and with genuine grief of mourning a fallen friend. To Flamma, my brother-in-arms, who fought bravely and died too soon, or even of a victorious gladiator dedicating his prize money or a portion of it to the impoverished family of a deceased companion. This brotherhood of the damned, as it might be anachronistically but aptly called, could be a powerful, if temporary, coping mechanism, a small flickering pocket of shared humanity, understanding, and solidarity in an otherwise inhuman, uncaring, and brutally transactional world. But it was always a fragile, precarious, and dangerous thing, this camaraderie. The lanista, ever the pragmatist and cynical showman, might deliberately and cruelly pit known friends or close training partners against each other in the arena, knowing that such a matchup, fraught with emotional conflict and dramatic potential, would create a more engaging and therefore more entertaining spectacle for the easily jaded crowd. Or your best friend in the ludus, the man you trusted above all others, the one with whom you shared your deepest fears and your last crust of bread, could be suddenly and inexplicably sold to another troop in a distant, unknown province, or simply killed in his next scheduled match, leaving you even more alone, isolated and vulnerable in your grief. Attachments in this world are a profound danger, a critical vulnerability, a luxury that few can truly afford to indulge in for long if they wish to maximize their already slim chances of survival. You also learn, very quickly, to read the subtle, often unspoken cues of your immediate environment with an almost animalistic, heightened hyper-awareness. The shifting moods of the notoriously volatile trainers, the hushed, furtive whispers among the bored and often brutal guards, the physical condition and discernible mental state of the other gladiators around you, these subtle, often fleeting, easily missed cues could mean the difference between a normal, predictably brutal day and an even worse, potentially fatal one. You learn, through painful observation and bitter experience, which trainers are more sadistic and prone to sudden explosive rages, which guards might be bribed with a stolen trinket or a portion of your meager rations for a tiny extra scrap of food, a moment's respite from a particularly harsh duty, or perhaps a blind eye turned to a minor infraction. You learn which fellow gladiators are teetering precariously on the edge of snapping, becoming a clear and present danger to everyone around them in their desperation or madness. It's a constant, exhausting, draining state of vigilance, a relentless mental tax on your already frayed nerves. There's no real privacy, no true moment of genuine, uninterrupted rest or peace, not even in the dead of night. Even in the supposed sanctuary of your cramped, shared cell, you're constantly, acutely aware of the cacophony of sounds around you, the ominous clanking of chains from a nearby punishment cell, the agonized, muffled groans of the injured or dying from the ludus infirmary, the distant, blood-curdling, terrifying roar of the crowd, if games are underway in the local amphitheater, a sound that serves as a constant, chilling reminder of your own impending fate. The arena and all it represents is always there, a looming, oppressive, inescapable presence in your mind, a dark shadow over your every waking moment, even when you're not physically standing on its blood-soaked sands. This isn't just about sheer physical survival. It's about navigating a treacherous, exhausting, and profoundly damaging psychological minefield every single day of your truncated, brutalized life. Now, let's confront the inevitable, the terrifying spectre that haunts your every waking moment, and probably populates your fitful, nightmare-ridden dreams too. Failure. Its dire, unavoidable consequences, and the overarching, indifferent, and utterly ruthless systems of power and commerce that dictate your very existence, from the questionable quality of your daily gruel to the specific manner of your all-too-probable death. In the brutal, unforgiving world of the Roman gladiator, failure isn't about getting a mildly critical performance review from your manager, missing an important sales deadline, or fumbling a crucial presentation. Failure in your profession is usually messy, agonizingly painful, horrifyingly public, and almost invariably final. And the consequences are, to put it as mildly as humanly possible, severe and often fatal. What happens if you lose a fight in the arena? If you're lucky, incredibly, miraculously lucky, you're only wounded, and not mortally so. If you're even luckier than that, and the crowd and the presiding editor are feeling particularly generous, benevolent, or perhaps simply impressed that day, or perhaps you put on such a spectacular, courageous, and incredibly bloody losing performance that they collectively decide you've earned another chance to entertain them, you might be granted missio, release, remission, a temporary reprieve. You'll be dragged, probably unceremoniously, and without much care, off the hot sand by hulking arena attendants, likely to the spoliarium. This was a grim, utilitarian chamber, usually located somewhere beneath the stands or just outside the arena proper, where the dead and dying gladiators were taken to be unceremoniously stripped of their valuable armor, weapons, and any other salvageable equipment by the Lannister's staff. If you're still, somehow, alive at this point, you'll receive some form of medical attention. This wasn't necessarily administered out of pure kindness, compassion, or humanitarian concern for your well-being. Good, skilled doctors, like the famous Greek physician Galen, who, as previously mentioned, spent several formative years early in his long and distinguished career working at a prominent gladiator school in Pergamum, were employed by pragmatic Lannistae to patch up their valuable, damaged human assets. Their primary job, their sole focus, was to get you back into fighting condition as quickly and as cheaply as possible, so you could once again earn your keep, and their profit, in the arena. So, surgery is performed, probably without much in the way of effective anesthetic beyond a large, fortifying swig of cheap, sour wine, or perhaps, if you're unlucky, a sharp tap on the head with a heavy wooden mallet to render you temporarily unconscious. Wounds are probed, cleaned, perhaps with more wine or vinegar, and stitched, often crudely, with bronze needles and coarse linen or animal sinew thread. Broken bones are roughly set, as best as the physician's skill allows, and then splinted with wood and bandages. But the real, insidious, often invisible enemy in this pre-antibiotic, pre-germ theory world is infection. Even a relatively minor-looking wound, a deep puncture from a trident, a long gaping slash from a seeker, could easily become contaminated by the filth of the arena floor, which was often soaked in blood, animal excrement, and other delightful substances, unhygienic medical practices, or simply the bacteria present on your own skin. Such a wound could rapidly fester, leading to raging, uncontrollable fevers, terrifyingly swift-spreading gangrene that turns a limb black and putrid, life-threatening sepsis poisoning your entire system, and ultimately, a slow, agonizing, and thoroughly unpleasant death days, or even weeks after the initial fight. That's your potential reward for surviving the immediate combat. A different, more protracted, and often far more painful way to die. But what if Missio isn't granted? What if the crowd, worked into a frenzy, baying for blood and a definitive conclusion, screams for your death? What if those thousands of thumbs, or whichever gesture signified death that particular day in that particular arena, turn decisively downwards, or upwards, or sideways? Then your victorious opponent, or perhaps a specially designated, unimpassioned arena attendant, if your opponent is too weary from the fight, too merciful by nature, or simply not in the mood for another messy kill, will dispatch you without further delay. It's supposed to be a quick, relatively clean and efficient kill, a decisive sword thrust to the throat, severing the major arteries and windpipe, or perhaps a powerful blow between the shoulder blades aimed at the heart, or a sharp, deep stab into the back of the neck designed to sever the spinal cord and bring instant paralysis and death. But supposed to be, and actually is, are often two very different things in the heat and chaos of the moment, especially if the designated executioner is clumsy, inexperienced, nervous, or if the crowd is in a particularly sadistic mood and clearly desires to prolong the spectacle of your demise. Your final, gasping, blood-choked moments are a public performance, your death a form of grotesque, voyeuristic entertainment. There's no dignity in it, no quiet, private passing, just the brutal, public and irreversible finality of a human life extinguished for sport and profit. And remember, always remember, that failure isn't just about losing a formal, scheduled bout in the arena. Failure to train properly and with sufficient intensity and dedication, consistently showing cowardice or a distinct lack of aggression in practice or in combat, any overt act of disobedience or defiance towards the lanista or his designated trainers, or, God forbid, attempting to escape, a particularly foolish and almost invariably fatal endeavor, given the high walls, armed guards, and general lack of anywhere to run to. These all carry dire, painful, and often permanent consequences within the confines of the ludus itself. Flogging, as we've already established, is a common, almost routine punishment for a wide range of infractions. The cruel leather thongs of the whip or the stinging, bruising bite of heavy wooden rods tearing at the exposed skin on your back, buttocks and legs, leaving permanent, disfiguring, raised keloid scars that serve as a constant, visible, and humiliating reminder of your subjugated status and the ever-present consequences of stepping out of line. Being put in heavy, galling, uncomfortable iron chains for extended periods, sometimes for days or weeks on end, severely restricting your movement and adding immeasurably to your daily misery and degradation. Being systematically starved or fed only the bare minimum of stale bread and brackish water to weaken your body and break your spirit, or being confined to the ergastulum, essentially the ludus's private subterranean lightless prison, a dark, damp, unventilated, and unimaginably filthy hole in the ground. These are also par for the course for recalcitrant, troublesome, or simply unlucky gladiators. For truly serious infractions, such as assaulting a trainer, a very bad idea, inciting unrest among your fellow trainees, or, heaven forbid, attempting to organize or lead a revolt. Think of the legendary Spartacus, though successful. Large-scale gladiator revolts were exceedingly rare, and always, without exception, brutally, mercilessly, and very publicly suppressed to deter any future imitators. The punishment was designed to be exemplary, terrifying, and as horrific as Roman ingenuity could devise. This could mean crucifixion, a slow, agonizing, and deeply shameful death by public exposure nailed or tied to a wooden cross, being burned alive in the arena as part of the day's entertainment, or being thrown, unarmed and helpless, to starved and enraged wild beasts, damnatio ad bestias, a fate usually reserved for the lowest categories of criminals and enemies of the Roman state, but one that a particularly troublesome or unlucky gladiator might certainly face. The message from the authorities, from the lanista up to the emperor, was brutally, unmistakably clear. You are ours to control, body and soul, and any form of resistance, however minor, is not only futile, but will be met with overwhelming, terrifying, and ultimately lethal force. The institutions that govern every aspect of your life, the lanista who owns you, the editor of the games who rents you, the Roman state itself which sanctions and regulates this entire bloody enterprise, are powerful, impersonal, and utterly, chillingly indifferent to your individual humanity, your personal suffering, or your desperate, unspoken desire to simply live. The lanista, as we've established, sees you primarily as a commodity, a financial investment to be exploited for maximum profit with minimal outlay. The editor of the games views you as a pawn in his complex game of political maneuvering or social advancement, a disposable means to a self-serving end. The emperor, if he happens to be present at the games, as they often were in Rome itself, views the entire spectacle as a vital tool for maintaining public order, reinforcing his own divine authority and popularity, and projecting an image of Roman power, wealth, and generosity to the world. Even the crowd, your ultimate judge and jury, the thousands of anonymous faces roaring in the stands, is a fickle, unpredictable, bloodthirsty, and easily swayed entity, driven by base emotions, the vicarious thrill of witnessing violence and death, and a relentless craving for ever more extreme, novel, and shocking spectacle rather than any consistent or discernible sense of justice, fairness, mercy, or compassion. You are a tiny, insignificant, expendable cog in a vast, complex, and brutally efficient machine of mass entertainment, social control, and political propaganda. Think about the sheer, mind-boggling scale of it all. Amphitheatres like the mighty Colosseum in Rome, the Flavian Amphitheatre, could hold anywhere from 50, 0 to 80, 0 spectators, all of them clamouring for their daily dose of bread and bloody circuses. The complex logistics of supplying these massive arenas and hundreds of smaller ones across the sprawling Roman Empire, with a constant, reliable stream of enough gladiators, exotic wild animals for the hunts, and condemned criminals for public execution, were immense and highly organized. This was a state-sanctioned, heavily regulated, and incredibly profitable industry of death and entertainment. There were imperial ludices, directly owned and controlled by the emperor, and numerous, often competing private ludices run by entrepreneurial lanistae, all feeding into this insatiable, empire-wide public demand for violent spectacle. The entire system, from top to bottom, is designed to chew you up, extract the maximum possible entertainment value from your suffering and your death, and then spit you out, or more accurately, to consume you entirely, leaving nothing behind but a temporarily stained patch of sand, and perhaps a fleeting, quickly forgotten memory in the minds of the sated spectators. And what if, against all conceivable odds, against all statistical probability, you somehow manage to survive? What if you win fight after grueling fight, becoming a seasoned, scarred veteran, a crowd favorite, a veritable superstar of the blood-soaked sands, your name chanted by thousands? You might, if you're very good and very lucky, earn significant prize money from your victories, though a substantial chunk of that, often half or more, likely goes straight into the capacious coffers of your lanista, as per the terms of your initial, non-negotiable contract. You might gain a degree of fame, popular adoration, perhaps even the illicit, dangerous attention of wealthy, thrill-seeking, and morally ambiguous Roman matrons, though such liaisons were deeply scandalous, fraught with peril for both parties, and often ended very badly, especially for the gladiator involved. But you're still a gladiator. You still live under the constant, looming shadow of violent death. Each hard-won victory, each deafening roar of approval from the adoring crowd, just means you live to face another, possibly tougher, more skilled, or more desperate opponent in your next scheduled appearance. The odds, like a relentless tide, are always inexorably catching up with you. The house, in this particular deadly game, almost always wins in the end. The ultimate prize, the faint, flickering, almost unimaginable dream that perhaps keeps some gladiators going through the endless drudgery and terror, was the rudis, the symbolic wooden sword presented by the editor to a gladiator who had fought with exceptional skill, consistent bravery, and remarkable success for a significant number of years, typically thought to be around 3 to 5 years of consistent, high-level performance in the arena, though it varied greatly and depended heavily on the whim of the editor, the generosity of the lanista, and the gladiator's sustained popularity with the crowd. Receiving the rudis was a momentous occasion. It meant you were officially released from your gladiatorial contract, your oath fulfilled. You were, at least in theory, a free man once more, or at least free from the terrifying obligation to fight and kill for the entertainment of others. But how many, realistically, actually made it that far? Reliable, comprehensive statistics are notoriously hard to come by for the ancient world, but all available evidence suggests that the mortality rate in the arena and in the ludi from wounds, disease, and despair was incredibly, appallingly high. For every single gladiator who triumphantly walked away from the arena with a rudis clutched tightly in his scarred, trembling hand, countless, nameless others died on the arena sand, perished miserably from their untreated wounds or rampant disease back in the squalor of the ludus, or perhaps, in their final desperate moments, took their own lives to escape the unbearable suffering. And even if you achieve that coveted, almost mythical freedom, what then? What does life hold for an ex-gladiator in Roman society? You're still, in the strict eyes of Roman law, infamous, an individual of publicly disgraced status, though your hard-won fame and any wealth you might have managed to accumulate and keep from your lanista might mitigate some of the worst aspects of the social stigma. Your primary, marketable skills, honed over years of brutal training and life-or-death combat, are in fighting and killing. What respectable mainstream career path does that open up for you in the complex hierarchical structure of Roman society? Some retired gladiators, those who had the grim knack and the hardened stomach for it, became trainers, doctores, in a ludus, passing on their brutal, hard-won knowledge to the next unfortunate generation of doomed men. Some found employment as heavily armed bodyguards, satellites, for wealthy, powerful, or paranoid individuals, their intimidating presence and proven fighting prowess still very much in demand in an often violent and dangerous world. Some, tragically and perhaps inevitably, found that they couldn't adjust to a life of peace and normalcy outside the violent, structured, intensely adrenaline-fueled world they had known for so long. Driven by poverty, boredom, a longing for lost glory, or perhaps a strange, perverse, and undeniable addiction to the intoxicating roar of the arena's crowd and the thrill of combat. Some voluntarily re-enlisted as gladiators, choosing, incredibly, to return to the very meat grinder that had almost claimed them. Freedom was the dream, the ultimate aspiration, but the day-to-day reality for a retired gladiator could often be just another kind of bleak, difficult struggle, a life haunted by the ghosts of fallen comrades and past opponents, and defined by the deep, indelible scars, both visible on the body and hidden far deeper within the soul. The arena, you see, leaves its mark, and those wounds were much, much harder to heal than any mere sword cut. So, let's take a final, collective breath. Step back from the blood-soaked, gore-splattered sand of our imaginations and really absorb the grim totality of what we've witnessed here tonight. The life of a Roman gladiator, when stripped bare of its enduring Hollywood gloss, its persistent, romanticized heroism, and its often sanitized modern reinterpretations, was, by almost any conceivable human measure, utterly and profoundly appalling. It was a life almost entirely defined by coercion, relentless brutality, constant, gnawing, underlying fear, and the overwhelming, ever-present, statistically near certain probability of a violent, painful, and horrifyingly public death. Forget the stirring images of noble, principled warriors fighting willingly for abstract concepts like honor, glory, or freedom. The vast, overwhelming majority were desperate, trapped men, unwilling cogs in a monstrous, impersonal system, ruthlessly designed to exploit their suffering, their fear, and ultimately their deaths for mass entertainment, political expediency, and commercial profit. You were, in essence, a condemned man walking, your state-sanctioned execution merely delayed, theatricalized, and made into a popular public spectacle. Your daily routine was a grueling, physically punishing, and mentally exhausting preparation for your potential and highly probable demise. Your diet was monotonous, inadequate, often unhealthy, and cynically designed more for creating visually spectacular, non-fatal superficial wounds than for promoting peak physical performance, health, or longevity. Your living conditions were squalid, overcrowded, unsanitary, and conducive to the rapid spread of debilitating diseases. Your social status was that of a reviled outcast, legally shamed and debased even if, paradoxically and perversely, you were popularly adored, even sexually fetishized, by the very crowds who eagerly bayed for your blood. Your body, your very person, was not your own. It was an investment, a tool, a spectacle waiting to happen, a piece of human property to be used, abused, damaged, and ultimately broken and discarded for profit and amusement. Every cheer from the crowd, every roar of approval, every shower of flowers or coins thrown into the arena was a chilling, inescapable reminder that your pain was their pleasure, your fear their thrill, your potential agonizing death, their most anticipated and satisfying climax. When you dare to compare this brutal, short-lived existence to modern life, even with all its own unique stresses, anxieties, and manifold imperfections, the contrast is so stark, so profound, as to be almost incomprehensible, almost beyond our capacity to truly imagine. The next time you find yourself complaining about a tedious Zoom meeting that could have been an email, a demanding and unreasonable boss, a frustratingly slow internet connection, or the crushing existential weight of choosing what to watch next from an endless library of streaming service options, perhaps take a moment, just a brief, reflective moment. Picture yourself, if you can, standing in the vast, sun-baked heart of the Colosseum, the deafening, almost physical roar of 50, zero unseen people pressing in on your ears like a tangible force, the hot Mediterranean sun glinting cruelly off your opponent's freshly sharpened blade, the grimy, blood-stained, uneven sand beneath your trembling, bare or poorly shod feet, already ominously marked with the dark, sticky patches left by those unfortunate souls who came and fought and died before you. Suddenly, that overdue quarterly report, that overflowing email inbox, that disastrous first date, or even that truly awful burnt cup of coffee might not seem quite so unbearable, quite so tragically life-altering in comparison. We live, for all our modern complaints, with a level of safety, autonomy, personal freedom, medical care, and physical comfort that would have been utterly unimaginable. A fantastical, impossible dream to these brutalized men whose lives were so often forfeit before they even truly began. The solution to the fundamental existential problem of being a Roman gladiator was, most often, simply to die. The available coping mechanisms were grim, desperate, temporary stopgaps, a whispered, hopeless prayer to a pitiless, indifferent goddess, a fragile, fleeting, and dangerous bond of shared misery with a fellow sufferer, a grim, animalistic, primal determination to survive just one more day, one more agonizing minute, against all reasonable expectation. There was no real escape hatch from this life, no witness protection program for those who had seen too much, no golden parachute retirement plan, no pension. For the vast, overwhelming majority of these men, the only true, permanent release from their unending torment and terror came with death, whether relatively swift and brutal in the arena, or slow, painful, and festering from untreated wounds or rampant disease back in the miserable squalor of the ludus. It was a brutal, dehumanizing, and thoroughly miserable existence, a stark and enduring testament to the Roman Empire's remarkable, chilling capacity for both sophisticated, complex organization and stomach-churning, institutionalized cruelty on an industrial scale. And yet, even within that relentless, grinding daily horror, there were undeniably, if rarely, fleeting flashes of what we might recognize, perhaps even admire, as the indomitable human spirit, incredible, almost superhuman endurance in the face of unimaginable hardship and constant pain, moments of desperate, almost suicidal courage, born not of abstract nobility, but of sheer primal survival instinct. Perhaps even a strange, twisted, deeply ironic kind of pride in one's lethal skill in being the one left standing, however briefly, amidst the carnage. But these are mere tiny sparks, brief and quickly extinguished in an overwhelming, suffocating, and almost universal darkness. The overwhelming, unvarnished, and deeply uncomfortable truth is that it sucked, profoundly, comprehensively, and almost unimaginably, to be a gladiator in ancient Rome. Their lives were a brutal testament to the grim realities of power, entertainment, and the chilling expendability of human life in the ancient world, a far, far cry from the heroic legends, the noble sacrifices, and the sanitized, action-packed movie portrayals that still shape our popular imagination. They serve as a somber, unsettling, and profoundly necessary reminder of how thin the veneer of civilization can sometimes be, and how easily, under certain conditions, human beings can be turned into objects, into commodities, into mere disposable props for the amusement and distraction of others. And that, my friends, is the unglamorous, uncomfortable, but very real and deeply sobering story. A dark, blood-stained chapter in the long, complex, and often brutal history of human entertainment. And that human entertainment, that dark, blood-stained chapter, was built on a foundation not just of spilled guts and roaring crowds, but of cold, hard sesterces, of intricate contracts, and the relentless, unsentimental logic of commerce. You weren't just a fighter, a spectacle, or a condemned soul. You were first and foremost an investment, a commodity, a line item on someone's meticulously kept, or perhaps carelessly scrawled, ledger. So, let's peel back another layer of the grime and gore and look at the brutal economics of your existence. How did you become a walking, breathing, bleeding piece of merchandise in this vast Roman marketplace of pain? It usually starts, as so many miserable stories do, with a transaction. If you weren't a condemned criminal handed over by the state, in which case your acquisition cost to the lanista was minimal, perhaps just some administrative fees or bribes, you were likely bought like a prize bull, a sturdy mule, or a sack of grain. Imagine yourself, freshly captured in some disastrous border skirmish, your village still smoking in your memory, your chains clanking with every terrified step, You're herded into a slave market, a chaotic, noisy, and deeply dehumanizing place. You're prodded, inspected, your teeth examined, your muscles felt, your scars noted. Some might be seen as a sign of resilience, others as a defect reducing your price. Potential buyers, Lannister among them, circle like vultures, their eyes cold and appraising. They're not looking for character, for spirit, for anything remotely human beyond a basic capacity for violence and endurance. They're looking for raw material. What's your potential? Are you strong? Quick? Young enough to train but old enough to have some fight in you? Do you look exotic or fierce enough to catch the crowd's eye? The Lannister, your future owner and tormentor, is a businessman. He might be a former gladiator himself, one of the very few who survived and saved enough to invest. Or he might be a shrewd entrepreneur who saw an opportunity in the public's insatiable appetite for bloodshed. He's calculating your purchase price against your potential earnings. He's factoring in the cost of your meager upkeep, the barley, the beans, the occasional grudging medical attention. He's thinking about the trainers he'll have to pay to beat you into shape. It's a risk. You might die of disease in the ludus before ever setting foot in the arena. You might prove untrainable, a coward, or simply not very good at organized violence. You might get yourself killed in your very first fight, a total loss on his investment. But the potential rewards, if he picks a winner, are significant. A skilled, popular gladiator can command high fees when rented out to an editor for the games. So, he pays his sesterces, your ownership papers, if such formalities even exist for a fresh captive, are transferred, and you become his property. Your life, or what's left of it, now has a price tag, a value determined not by any intrinsic human worth, but by market forces and the Lannister's speculative gamble. Now, back at the ludus, the investment phase truly begins. Your training isn't just about making you a killer, it's about increasing your market value. Every skill you acquire, every pound of muscle you begrudgingly pack on, every scar you earn that makes you look more fearsome, theoretically adds to your price. Your Lannister is, in a grotesque way, cultivating his crop. He needs you to be good enough to survive, good enough to win, good enough to make him money. But not too good, perhaps, or too independent. A gladiator who wins too easily and too often might become arrogant, demanding, or even a threat. It's a delicate, brutal balance. And how is your value ultimately realized by your owner? Primarily through renting you out. When a local magistrate, a wealthy noble, or even the emperor decides to put on games, he, the editor, will approach various Lannister to procure the necessary talent. This is where the negotiations happen. The Lannister will extol your virtues, real or imagined, perhaps your impressive and likely exaggerated training record, your ferocity, your crowd-pleasing style. A price is agreed upon for your appearance. This fee can vary wildly. A raw recruit, a Tiro, making his debut, might command a relatively small sum. A seasoned veteran, a primus palus, top-ranked gladiator of his troop, with a string of victories and a devoted fan following, could be rented for a fortune. The contracts, the locationes conductorum, could be complex. They would specify the type of gladiator, perhaps even a particular individual if he was famous. Crucially, they would often stipulate what happened if you were killed or permanently maimed. In many cases, if a gladiator was killed in the arena, the editor who hired him had to pay the Lannister his full estimated value, a much larger sum than the rental fee. This, perversely, sometimes acted as an incentive for editors to grant missio to a defeated gladiator if he fought well. It was cheaper to let him live and potentially be rented again than to pay the death price. But if the crowd was baying for blood, or if the gladiator fought poorly, the editor might decide the entertainment value of your death outweighed the financial penalty. You are, quite literally, a pawn in these high-stakes financial and political games. Think about the sheer callousness of it. Your life and death are subjects of contractual clauses. If gladiator Ursus is killed as a result of combat, the sum of 10 sesterces shall be paid to Lannister Marcus. Your Lannister might even be secretly hoping you die spectacularly if the death payment is high enough, and he thinks you're past your peak earning potential anyway. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? That the man who feeds you badly and shelters you poorly might profit more from your demise than your continued survival. And what if you're one of those auctority, the free men who volunteered? You signed a contract, swearing away your freedom for a set period, in exchange for a signing bonus and the promise of prize money, a portion of which, naturally, would also go to the Lannister. You are still, in essence, a commodity, albeit one with a slightly different acquisition path. Your contract dictates your obligations, your pay, if you survive to collect it, and the conditions of your servitude. The Lannister still owns your fighting capacity for the duration of that contract. He still profits from renting you out. You might have entered the ludus with a degree of agency the slave or criminal lacked, but once that oath is sworn and the contract signed, you are just as much a part of his stable of fighters, your body and blood up for sale. The pressure to perform, therefore, isn't just about survival, it's about maintaining your value. A gladiator who consistently loses, or who fights in a dull, uninspired way, sees his market price plummet. He becomes less attractive to editors, a less profitable asset for the Lannister. Such a gladiator might find himself thrown into more dangerous, less prestigious matchups, or perhaps even sold off cheaply to a less scrupulous Lannister in some backwater province where standards are lower. Or worse, he might be deemed no longer worth the cost of his upkeep and disposed of in some less public, though no less final, manner. There's no room for sentiment in this business. You perform, you earn, or you perish. Consider the infrastructure required to support this industry. Lannister weren't just isolated entrepreneurs. There were networks, connections, a trade in gladiators that spanned the empire. A Lannister in Gaul might sell a promising but troublesome fighter to a colleague in Hispania. Gladiators could be part of a touring troupe, moving from city to city, arena to arena, following the games circuit much like modern athletes, but with infinitely higher stakes. This wasn't just about sport, it was big business, generating vast sums of money for Lannister, for editors, through political gain and popularity. And for all the ancillary trades that supported the games: armourers, weaponsmiths, animal traders, food vendors, even the manufacturers of the absorbent sand for the arena floor. And at the very bottom of this economic pyramid, the foundation upon which it was all built. There you are. Your body is the raw material. Your blood, the ink in the contracts. Your potential death, the ultimate product being sold. Every cheer you elicit, every gasp of horror, every demand for your death or your reprieve is a reflection of your current market standing, your entertainment value. You might, if you're very successful, see some of the prize money. You might even be gifted coins or valuables by wealthy admirers, but the lion's share of the profit generated by your suffering goes elsewhere, into the pockets of your Lannister, into the coffers of the editor, greasing the wheels of this vast, brutal, and highly lucrative entertainment machine. This commodification is perhaps the ultimate dehumanization. You are not seen as a man with hopes, fears, dreams, or a past. You are an asset to be managed, a risk to be calculated, a resource to be exploited until it is depleted. Your Lannister might give you a pat on the back after a victory, but it's the pat a farmer gives a prize-winning pig, not a gesture of genuine human connection. He's pleased with his investment, not with you as a person. When he looks at your wounds, he's not primarily concerned with your pain, but with how long it will take you to heal and how much it will cost, and whether you'll be fit to fight again and earn him more money. So, as you lie there on your stone slab, listening to the distant sounds of the ludus, the clank of chains, the shouts of trainers, the groans of the injured. Understand this: your misery has a price. Your courage has a price. Your fear has a price. Your life, and even more so your death, has a price. You are caught in a relentless cycle of blood and business, a spectacle of suffering bought and sold for the amusement of an empire and for the profit of a few. It's a cold, hard, economic reality, perhaps even more chilling than the prospect of the sword. And yet, within this cold, hard economic reality, a strange and twisted phenomenon could sometimes bloom. A perverse flower fertilized by blood and sesterces, fame. Yes, you, a piece of property, a condemned man, a slave bought and sold like livestock, could become famous. Infamously famous, perhaps, but famous nonetheless. Imagine it. You've survived, not just survived, but won, again and again. You've developed a style, a signature move, a way of dispatching opponents that is particularly brutal, or surprisingly elegant, or just reliably effective. The crowd starts to recognize you. They learn your new, harsh-sounding arena name, Flammer, Spiculus, Hermes, and they start to chant it. That first time you hear it, a low rumble building to a deafening roar, thousands of voices screaming your name. It's a potent drug, an intoxicating wave of sound and raw emotion that washes over you, momentarily eclipsing the fear, the pain, the stench of the ludus. In that moment, standing on the blood-soaked sand, your opponent vanquished at your feet, the roar of 80,000 people thundering in your ears, you might almost feel like a god. Or at least, something more than the chattel you legally are. You see the adulation in their eyes, the excitement, the almost sexual thrill they derive from your violence. It's a heady, dangerous brew. You might even catch a glimpse of your own crude likeness, scratched onto a wall by an admirer, or see a cheap oil lamp molded in the shape of a gladiator vaguely resembling you, sold in the market stalls outside the amphitheatre. Your lanista, ever the opportunist, might commission a mosaic for the ludus entrance depicting your greatest victories, a crude form of advertising for his star pupil. But here's the bitter, iron-laced truth that never ever goes away. No matter how many victories you notch up, no matter how loudly the crowd screams your name, you are still infamous, disgraced, legally on par with pimps and prostitutes. That fame you've achieved, it doesn't change your fundamental status. The same senator who leaps to his feet, roaring his approval when you deliver a particularly spectacular killing blow, would likely consider it beneath his dignity to speak to you outside the arena, unless it was to give an order. His wife, who might secretly thrill to your savage grace and rippling sweat-sheened muscles from the safety of her shaded box, would faint from social shame if you were to approach her in the forum. Polite Roman society, the educated elite, the keepers of tradition and morality, officially abhorred your profession. They saw gladiators as the dregs of society, brutalized and brutalizing, a necessary evil perhaps for public entertainment and order, but certainly not figures to be emulated or respected in any genuine, the lasting way. They wrote poems and satires mocking your kind, even as they flocked to the games. So, you exist in this bizarre paradox. Adored by the masses, your name on everyone's lips, your exploits a topic of breathless conversation in the wine shops and public baths, yet simultaneously despised and held in contempt by the very society that consumes your bloody spectacle. This fame, of course, attracts attention, both wanted and decidedly unwanted. Wealthy Roman matrons, bored with their arranged marriages and staid domestic lives, were notorious for developing passionate, often scandalous infatuations with famous gladiators. You, with your raw physicality, your aura of danger, your proximity to death, become an object of intense, illicit desire. They might send you gifts, fine food, wine, money, even jewelry, smuggled into the ludus via a bribed guard or a complicit trainer. They might try to arrange clandestine meetings, a dangerous game for everyone involved. Juvenal, the Roman satirist, famously wrote of Epia, a senator's wife, who abandoned her husband and children to run off to Egypt with her gladiator lover, Sergiolus, a man described as no longer young, scarred, and with a damaged eye. The scandal was immense, but it highlights the potent, almost animalistic allure that a successful gladiator could hold. For you, such attention is a double-edged sword. On one hand, the gifts might offer a fleeting moment of comfort, a taste of a life you can never truly have. The attention might feed your ego, a small compensation for the daily degradation, but it's also incredibly dangerous. A jealous husband, a powerful and humiliated man, could easily arrange for your accidental death in the arena or a quiet dispatch in the ludus. Your Lannister too would be wary. While he might appreciate the fame that draws crowds and increases your rental value, he doesn't want his prize asset embroiled in a scandal that could bring trouble from the authorities or make you a target. He wants you focused on fighting, not on illicit love affairs. And what of those gifts? Do you even get to keep them? Or does the Lannister confiscate the lion's share, another perk of owning you? Probably the latter. So, you become a celebrity gladiator. Perhaps your conditions in the ludus improve slightly. If you are a consistent top earner, a primus palace whose victories fill the Lannister's coffers, you might get a slightly larger ration of food, maybe even a bit of that rare meat. Your cell might be a fraction less crowded, your chains a little lighter when not in training. You might even be afforded a certain grudging respect from the trainers and guards. But don't kid yourself. It's a gilded cage, and a very flimsy one at that. Your life is still not your own. You still fight when and where you're told, against whomever your Lannister and the game's editor decide. Your body is still a commodity, albeit a premium one for the time being. The pressure to maintain that fame, to keep that premium label, is immense, a crushing weight. Every fight is a new gamble. One bad performance, one unexpected loss, one moment of perceived cowardice, and the adulation of the crowd can turn to scorn and derision in an instant. The cheers can become jeers. The calls for missio can become howls for Ugula. Your fame is built on a knife edge, and the fall is precipitous and usually fatal. And what of your relationships within the ludus? The other gladiators might look up to you, the star, but there's always an undercurrent of envy, of ambition. The man who shares your training yard, who perhaps even sought your advice, is also dreaming of the day he might face you, defeat you, and usurp your position at the top. Are they truly your comrades, or just rivals biding their time? In this brutal ecosystem, genuine, selfless friendship is a rare and fragile bloom, easily crushed under the weight of desperation and the relentless pursuit of survival. The loneliness of your particular brand of fame can be profound, an isolation born of being both a hero and a pariah, an idol and a slave. Your Lannister will certainly exploit your fame. Your image, your name, your reputation for thrilling violence, these become marketing tools. He can demand higher fees for your appearances. He can attract more paying spectators to games where you are billed as the star attraction. The editor of the games, too, basks in your reflected glory. A popular gladiator fighting at his newness enhances his own prestige, his generosity, his connection to the pulse of the people. You are a tool for their enrichment and their advancement, your stardom merely amplifying your utility to them. But it's all so terribly fleeting. You are only as good, only as famous, only as valuable as your last fight. A serious injury that ends your career in the arena means your fame evaporates like morning mist. You become yesterday's news, forgotten as quickly as you were celebrated, replaced by the next rising star. And if that injury doesn't kill you outright, what then? A cripple in the ludus is a drain on resources. Your Lannister might sell you off for a pittance to work in the mines, or simply abandon you to beg on the streets if he's feeling particularly uncharitable. There's no pension plan for famous gladiators, no lucrative career as a commentator or coach in the modern sense, unless you're one of the very, very few who survive to become a doctor in a ludus, teaching others the grim arts that kept you alive. Think about the psychological toll of this bizarre duality. How do you reconcile the roaring adoration of tens of thousands of people one moment with the cold, contemptuous kick of a guard or the dehumanizing reality of your chains the next? How do you process being a public hero and a legally disgraced slave simultaneously? It's a recipe for profound internal conflict, a kind of institutionalized schizophrenia. Some famous gladiators undoubtedly developed a swagger, an arrogance, a belief in their own invincibility, fueled by the crowd's adulation. Others might have sunk deeper into a cynical despair, seeing the fame for the hollow, dangerous illusion it truly was. You see your face on those crude lamps, hear the songs and poems, often obscene, composed about your exploits, and you know it means nothing for your actual freedom, your actual safety. There are no lucrative endorsement deals for the top brand of Gladius, no talk show appearances to discuss your latest victory, no comfortable retirement villa funded by your arena earnings. Your merchandise is sold by others for their profit. Your story is told by others, often to denigrate you even as they sensationalize your deeds. And then there are the moments when the mask of fame slips, when the brutal, underlying abhorrence of your existence by respectable society pierces through the cheers. Perhaps it's the way a wealthy spectator averts his gaze if you happen to catch his eye too directly, a flicker of distaste or fear before he remembers to affect an air of detached amusement. Or the way noble women whisper behind their fans, their eyes filled with a mixture of illicit thrill and genuine revulsion. You know, deep in your weary bones, that the same people who praise your courage and skill in the controlled environment of the arena would likely spit on you or call for the city watch if you encountered them unchained and unguarded in a public street. They admire your performance of violence, but they despise the performer. They consume your bloody offering, but they are disgusted by the hand that offers it. This is the twisted heart of your fame. It is inextricably bound to the very thing that makes you an outcast. You are celebrated for your ability to kill, to maim, to endure and inflict horrific violence. Actions that in any other context would see you condemned as a monstrous criminal. The arena sanctifies your brutality, transforms it into entertainment, but it never, ever erases the stain of it from your person in the eyes of the elite. So, you walk this tightrope, adored and abhorred, a living, breathing paradox. The cheers are real, a potent, addictive drug. The graffiti bearing your name is real. The lust in some eyes, the fear in others, all real. But the freedom, the respect, the fundamental human dignity that should accompany such widespread recognition, that remains an illusion. A cruel mirage shimmering just beyond the blood-spattered walls of the arena. Your fame is a dangerous, glittering costume draped over the wretched, chained body of a slave. And you know, with a certainty that chills you even under the hottest Italian sun, that the same crowd that showers you with flowers today will, if you displease them, scream just as passionately for your throat to be cut tomorrow. That is the brutal, unvarnished truth of being a famous gladiator in ancient Rome. You are a monster and a hero, a god and a dog, all at the same, exhausting, terrifying time.